Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We're going to get started in just 1 minute and give everyone an opportunity to log in. Hello, thank you everyone for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started, and I will hand it off to our Executive Director, Laurent Hubert.
So thank you for joining us today and welcome to this webinar on tobacco product waste, where you will hear various lessons from around the world. The WHA has released a very good Q&A document just a few recently, stating that the approximate weight of waste of tobacco products is about 25 million metric tons, which is indeed quite a lot. And just the cigarette butts, which have cellulose acetate filters, which do not biodegrade. And unfortunately, for about 4.5 trillion cigarettes end up discarded in the environment every year. And even e-cigarette waste leads to about 99 billion pounds of discarded waste, according to 2017 estimates. And unfortunately, the tobacco industry too often used to manipulate the environmental concerns through corporate social responsibility projects and trying to shift the burden to the consumer versus on the companies, on their own companies. So today you will hear concrete examples of possible entry points to address those problems, as well as challenges from the EU, France, and the United States. So today's webinar is hosted by ASH, the Cigarette Butt Pollution Project, the Comité National contre le Tabagisme in France, and the Belgian Alliance for Smoke-Free Society. Before I introduce the speakers, some very quick housekeeping issues. If you have any questions, you can please address them to a specific panelist and use the icon at the bottom, the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. And yes, feel free to direct them to any of the panelists. So I'll introduce the first panelist, who is Danielle van Kalmthout, who's the General Coordinator for the Belgian Alliance for Smoke-Free Society, and she will address the EU Extended Producer Responsibility. Danielle, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Laurent, and good afternoon to you all. I would like first to thank the organizers for having the opportunity to speak to you today about tobacco and environmental impact and the EU legislation to tackle butts, which is called the Single-Use Plastics Directive. Next slide, please. So very shortly, I will put a little glance on the environmental impact of tobacco products and consumption, then where the EU subdirective is coming from, some explanation about the subdirective and extended producer responsibility, and time to act. So a few recommendations on what we can do. Next slide, please. The first, of course, when we talk about environment, we talk about the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. And here also environment is implicated. In Article 3, we talk about the consumption of tobacco, and in Article 18 is focused on the production of tobacco and its environmental implications. Next slide, please. So just to say, there is a lot going on when we talk about environmental impact of tobacco. And here you see a picture from the WH report with all the different stages from tobacco production and consumption. And of course, today we will only talk about the one on the post-consumer waste, but we shouldn't forget that the production phase of tobacco is also having an enormous impact on the environment. Next slide, please. So some of you might know this picture, which gives in a very quick overview what tobacco, how much tobacco is produced. So the 32.4 of green tobacco leaf, which is produced in 125 countries over the world, most in middle and low income countries. Which leads at the end to 6 trillion cigarette sticks a year. On the left-hand side, you see what enormous pressure this puts on the environment, on land, soil, and water, and also that it has, and that you see on the right-hand side, an enormous environmental impact on the output side. Sorry. So that's the solid waste, the CO2 emissions, and wastewater. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So the difficulty with tobacco waste is the quantity, as Laurent has already mentioned. Also the difficulty to clean it up, because tobacco butts are often in sand in the beach, between tiles, etc. So it's very it's taking a lot of effort to clean it up. The toxicity, because what is in the cigarette is also in the butt and leaches into the groundwater and the other aquatic environments. Plastics, because cigarette butts are made of plastic, and they are not biodegradable, contrary to what a lot of people think, and they fall into microplastics, which are then which are associated with human health impacts, such as brain impact on brain development, respiration, etc. And last, also important, that citizens perceive environments with cigarette butts as less clean. Next slide, please. So to understand the EU subdirective, so the EU Single-Use Plastics Directive, we just have to, and I think it's important that you know the context. You might know the European Green Deal that has been adopted by the European Commission in 2019. The proposal of the Green Deal is first and foremost a response to the climate change crisis, but it also addresses other environmental challenges, such as biodiversity, pollution, and more. And it also focuses on the circular economy. It's important to know that the Green Deal is not a law, but it will inspire for new legislation, and it follows up on existing legislation. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the circular economy package that I mentioned before in the Green Deal, you see here actually how we come to the subdirective. So first we had a circular economy package and action plan that was adopted in 2015. So that was the first announcement that we had to have in the European Union a strategy on plastics, in particular also on marine litter. Then we had a strategy specifically on plastics. It was adopted in 2018, and there it was announced that there would be a single-use plastics directive. And then finally, as adopted in June 2019, we had the single-use plastics directive adopted. Because plastic as cigarette butts are the second most found single-use plastics item on beaches in the European Union. Next slide, please. So before going into the subdirective itself, it would be good to know just what extended producer responsibility is. It's an environmental policy approach in which a producer's responsibility for a product is extended to the post-consumer stage of a product's life cycle. So it means that there is a shift of responsibility. So in this case, a financial responsibility from governments, because of course we are paying now for the cleanup of the cigarette butts, to the producer. And it also is meant to have encouragement of producers to take environmental considerations during the design and manufacture during the phases of product development. So in the sub-directive, we have 2 articles that are important for cigarette butts. So it's Article 7 on marking requirements. Next slide, please. So since July of last year, you can see on all the single-use plastic items that are here in the European Union, this logo, which actually means that you don't have to put it on the ground because it hurts aquatic environment. I mean, we can also discuss about this. I think there are a lot of remarks to make about the logo, but this is what's in place now since the 3rd of July, 2021. Next slide, please. So we have an article which is important. It's Article 3 on producer responsibility, and the deadline of transposition in the European Union is the 5th of January 23. The difficulty actually with this article, then we go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. Sorry, I think there's I had an updated version of the PowerPoint, but it's okay. I will just explain Article 5.3 and what's the difficulty. Because I think that the sub-directive is a good directive because it introduces extended producer responsibility. But what we see is that the extended producer responsibility is quite limited. So when you read the article very carefully, and that was a few slides behind, you can see that there is only that it only covers the costs of waste of those products that are discarded in public collection systems. So actually, this means that all the cigarette butts that are not in collected in public collection systems are not falling within the scope of extended producer responsibility. So that's an important one to realize that. The second one, which was really stipulated in the sub-directive, is that the costs will only be covered for the producer for the services that are executed in a cost-efficient way. But as we saw, cigarette butts are very difficult to clean up because it sticks between tiles, there is sand on the beach, etc. So it's not very cost efficient to clean them up. So that's also a difficulty. And that's surely what the tobacco producers will say, that they will only cover the costs of the cigarette butts that are could be done in a cost-efficient way, while of course we know that it's very cost inefficient to clean up cigarette butts. A third one, which limits the extended producer responsibility, is that it's only applicable for activities undertaken by public authorities or on their behalf. But we know that there are a lot of volunteers. There are a lot of groups that are doing cleanup actions, etc. They are important. Actually, all those costs and all those butts that are collected via voluntary cleanup actions will not be covered by the extended producer responsibility of the sub-directive. And the last one is that the calculation methodology has also been established in a proportionate way. That's also difficult to see how that will be done, and we are still waiting also for some guidelines on that. How much will the producers be charged in their calculation? Which is also an issue. Will it be by number, by weight, by volume? In our amount, the amount should be determined by the number of cigarette butts are collected, not by weight or volume. But of course, this will be a discussion in every member state of the European Union. So what we can expect from the tobacco industry, and we actually see that already, is that they try to minimize the scope of EPR. I mean, what I was just been explaining to you is also following the lobbying that has been done during the negotiations of the sub-directive. So they will downsize the costs of collection waste and the waste management costs, downsize the environmental impact of cigarette butts, and very importantly, that they will use the sub-directive to connect with public authorities, especially on the environmental side. I mean, it's very normal that people on the environmental administration, that they are not aware of Article 5.3 of the Framework Convention. So they do not know that it's in contradiction with Article 5.3. To establish and to implement the extended producer responsibility obligations of the sub-directive. So we really should inform all the environmental administrations of the EU member states and also beyond about Article 5.3. What they do, and you see that a lot, is that they promote portable ashtrays, therefore putting the focus on the individual responsibility of the smoker and not on themselves. And they want to be involved in the establishment of EPR schemes, and that Francois will explain you in more detail how they have achieved to do this in France. Because of course, the tobacco industry should not be managing the eco-organisms that are dealing with cigarettes, but this is contrary to Article 5.3. Next slide, please. So this was a slide I was talking about before. So here you see in detail Article 8.3 and 8.4 with the minimization of the scope of extended producer responsibility. Next slide, please. So the thing we can do best is to ensure that people do not start smoking. So that's why we create smoke-free generations and encourage people and smokers to quit, because less smokers is less waste. And we need to follow the principle of health and all policies. Then prevent filters ending up in nature. So what we could do is to establish a target to get fewer cigarette butts, and also ensure so that cigarette butts end up, as we have the sub-directive in the European Union, in the public collection systems. So that's what we're trying to achieve. Of course, as I said before, it's only the public collection system. So what do we do with all the filters that are on the that are not collected there? Maybe in this context, we should discuss a filter ban to get actually rid of the problem at all. Next slide, please. So as mentioned before, I think what we should do is try to inform the environmental ministries departments about Article 5.3 of the Framework Convention, ensure that we have a correct calculation of the collection and waste management costs, ensure that the accurate amount of litter costs will be passed on to tobacco producers. So include a collection target for governments to achieve a reduction. Make sure that the tobacco industry is not involved in the eco-organism, and ensure that pocket ashtrays are not becoming the answer to the cigarette butt problem, because that's what the tobacco industry is often doing now, is that they promote pocket ashtrays and put therefore the responsibility again on the individual smoker and not on themselves. Next slide, please. So I think it would be good to have with the health NGOs to exchange information, to work together, and also to cooperate with the environmental NGOs. I think when we work together and we join forces, we can achieve something and do something to lessen the impact, the environmental impact of cigarette butts on the environment. So that was my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Danielle. So our next speaker is François Topart, and he's the Communications and Advocacy Officer at the Comité National contre le Tabagisme. François, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I'm going to present you work we prepared with the French Alliance Against Tobacco, l'Alliance contre le tabac, which focus on what is happening in France. It's really interesting because France wanted to engage early in the transposition of the subdirective, which is good at some point, but this transposition, in particular on the tobacco product issue, raises problems and brings inoperative and even counterproductive solution to the issue of tobacco waste management. Next slide, please. Thanks. In 2020, the law on the fight against waste and the circular economy, so the AGEC law, transposed the subdirective in France. The AGEC law is based on the polluter pays principle and environmental responsibility. In fact, it brings a major evolution on the waste issue. Fighting waste is no longer only a question of treating waste, but also of preventing it. So concretely, the AGEC law obliged manufacturers to three different things. First, it obliged to adopt an eco-design approach for products. Secondly, it obliged to contribute to the development of waste collection, treatment, and recycling solutions. And third, it obliged to contribute to the prevention and to the management of waste. So the AGEC law provides for the establishment of eco-organizations to fulfill their obligation. And for the tobacco issue, this eco-organization is ALCOM in France. It was approved by the public authorities in July 2021 for a period of 6 years. Next slide, please. So what's ALCOM? In fact, ALCOM presents itself as an eco-organization whose objective is to reduce the presence of butts thrown inappropriately in the public space. The particularity of ALCOM is that it's directly linked to the tobacco industry and its allies. And for example, if you have a look on the website, you can notice that the founding members of ALCOM are exclusively composed of tobacco industry players, such as Philip Morris, of course, Japan Tobacco, British American Tobacco, the French Confederation of Tobacconists, and the French Association of Smoked Tobacco Suppliers. In the same way, the president of ALCOM, Jérôme Duffieux, is also the former president of the French Association of Smoked Tobacco Suppliers, as well as the president of Traditab, which is another French tobacco player. So ALCOM, which is obviously an emanation of the tobacco industry, claims on its website to be at the heart of a collective movement and at the service of a new responsibility. And in 2021, decree defines the specification set for the approval of eco-organizations dedicated to manage the waste of tobacco products, and the specifications provide in particular free provision of street ashtrays, free provision of pocket ashtrays, covering the cost from cleaning up cigarette ends, the organization of awareness campaigns on the environmental impact of cigarette ends, and financial support for research and development projects. Next slide, please. So the problem is that ALCOM, as it's now designed, creates a lot of problem. First, the principle of extended producer responsibility is denied by ALCOM because it places the responsibility for pollution related to cigarette ends only on the incivility of smokers. And this kind of argument is a very typical tobacco industry strategy. in accordance with the AGEC law, ALCOM should also provide a solution for the prevention and reduction of the production of tobacco waste. But in fact, the eco-organization only proposes an incomplete solution, which is very limited to the management of the waste produced. And some solutions like free provision of pocket ashtrays are counterproductive. In fact, it's today well known that multiplication of ashtrays can be something incitative for smokers. And ALCOM, because it's, as I said, obviously linked to the tobacco industry, is intended to engage in a partnership with local authorities. And this is in fact a violation of the implementation guidelines of Article 5.3 of the Framework Convention, which limits interaction between the tobacco industry and public authorities to what is strictly necessary. And to finish, ALCOM is used by the manufacturers as a part of a communication operation aimed at promoting the social responsibility of these actors, which violates the ban of CSR operation by the tobacco industry. What we can recommend is, as Daniel said, the member states of the European Union must transpose a sub-directive by January 2023. And to avoid repeating the same mistakes, it's really important to define a good practice guide which takes into account the specificity of the tobacco industry and the obligation of Article 5.3 of the FCTC. In France, it's also necessary to revise the eco-organization system. The tobacco industry, it's really important that the tobacco industry participates in the financing of the eco-organization, but the tobacco industry can't be a stakeholder. And as I said, the total independence of the eco-organization is part of France's international commitments. And finally, it's and also really important to go beyond the management of cigarette butts. It's now possible to consider a ban on tobacco products filters. From a human rights perspective, this option is really relevant because filters are in contradiction with several fundamental rights, like the right of life, the right to health, and the right to live in a healthy environment. As Daniel said, filters are the cause of massive pollution in the world, and it's also proven that the filter has no really health justification. It increases addictiveness, toxicity, and it makes the initiation to tobacco products easier. And there are precedents that show that it's in fact possible to regulate and to constrain industry on the composition of tobacco products. I have two examples. Example one, since November 2011, the EU has imposed a standard for cigarettes, the reduced ignition propensity, so RIP cigarettes, in order to reduce fire risk. And in this case, RIP cigarettes has imposed standards to cigarette paper because of environmental and safety risk. And example two, in France, an order of March 2016 on the conditions of neutrality and uniformity of packaging and paper for cigarettes and roll your own tobacco, this order makes possible to regulate the presentation of tobacco products per unit, like font, leaf, color of the leaves, and the filters. So thank you. I think I'm done.
Thank you, Francois. Thank you for and this kind of letting us know that basically it is totally feasible to move towards a ban of filters, and I'm sure we'll hear more about this also from our next speaker. And also, it's interesting. I mean, letting us know that basically this example in French of being co-optioned by the industry, which is not unique, and we've seen it in Australia with the Keep Australia Beautiful, and I'm sure we hear about the Keep America Beautiful platforms where the industry has used that to co-opt the issue. Next speaker is Dr. Thomas Novotny, who's Professor Emeritus of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at San Diego State University, and the director of the Cigarette Butt Projects, founder of the project. Tom, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Laurent, and thanks for inviting me to come and participate in this. I really learned a lot about what's going on in Europe. And I'm going to give you, a little bit of an overview of some of the initiatives here in the US. I wish I could report on a lot of success, but at least I can give you an idea about what's been happening and how the tobacco industry has been responding to it, as well as the government at the state and local level. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the jurisdictional progress. California is a leader in tobacco control. It's got tax-funded tobacco control research and also local and state tobacco control programs that are having a tremendous effect, at the state level at least. And so one effort was recently made to ban single-use electronic cigarettes as well as filters, and I'll talk more about that because it did suffer from the tobacco industry's excellent lobbying work. New York State has now got a Tobacco Product Waste Reduction Act in consideration, and we'll talk about that. I'm going to mention some of the other mitigation approaches that have been used that interact with extended producer responsibility in many ways, including a litter fee that was assessed in San Francisco that's been in place now for 12 years, actually. And then just to review a little bit more about the tobacco industry tactics that you've been hearing about with the two previous speakers. So the California Assembly Bill, we have two houses of government here in the state, just as in at the federal level. This one is introduced in the Assembly, the lower house, and it was meant to ban the sale of single-use filters. That was the most important and focused part of this bill. It also included, and I think this was a mistake, cannabis products. And as you know, we're rapidly legalizing cannabis sales. There's cannabis dispensaries all over the place. And much of this has gotten actually in the way of tobacco control policy work as well. And it did include a ban on single-use e-cigarettes. Well, this was actually the third attempt. I testified 3 times over the last 10 years on bills that were meant to address the environmental issues. And as a result of that, they were referred to a committee called the Assembly Government Organizations Committee, which was a killing ground for any kind of tobacco control bills. And of course, it was killed in those committees that didn't actually make it out to get a vote of the legislature. This one had 15 co-authors, and it was referred to the Health Committee and not to this Government Organizations Committee. And the chair of that Health Committee was a dentist and an environmentalist. It was sponsored by a environmental group, a very respectable environmental group, National Stewardship Action, but at the state level, the California Product Stewardship Council. So, it had this focus on extended producer responsibility as well as product stewardship. And they've had a lot of success in the past on things such as paint recycling and mattresses and refrigerators to get these things managed in more environmentally responsible way. But their approach is to bring the industry into the act. And this is, of course, as you've just heard, a big mistake. And because of that, the tobacco lobbying door was wide open. And I had the unfortunate experience of actually sitting in a room with the chair of this health committee and the tobacco lobbyists to hear what they had to say, which was all a bunch of lies about how there was going to be, massive counterfeit cigarettes, or rather contraband cigarettes being sold, and significant loss of income, etc. The other thing that was important is that some of the main voluntary groups, like the Cancer Society, Heart Association, Lung Association, did not sign on to this. And I tried to find out reasons why. And I think that there's a hesitancy about this filter issue, and I'll talk more about that later, but also because they have a set of priorities that have already been established that they need to spend their efforts on, such as banning flavored tobacco products, which has been successful and now is being challenged actually with a referendum at the state level to be presented to the voters to decide on. So it's been difficult to get them involved in the filter ban attempt. Well, it was amended to remove this single-use filter component, but also the cannabis products, which is good. Those will be dealt with in a separate legislation. One of the things I think is important to note, one of the reasons why the chair of the committee said he was uncomfortable and pushing this forward as a filter ban, is that there were a couple of articles published that were showing an association of lung cancer and also increased nicotine addiction potential with unfiltered cigarettes. I can talk more about this later, but the study was not done to answer those questions. The study was actually a secondary data analysis of a screening program for high-risk smokers, elderly smokers, 55 to 74, who were at very high risk of lung cancer. And it was not really a representative sample. And it was, for a lot of other reasons I can talk about, was really inappropriate. And I actually spoke to the authors of these reports, and they agreed that there was no causal association there, that there was an association, but not causally related. All of the information that we have from the National Cancer Institute and the U.S. Surgeon General say there is no health benefit to filters. And so I think everybody in the tobacco control community agrees with that. Again, all of these other arguments are familiar to us, but also PMI, Philip Morris International, weighed in with its promise to stop selling combustible cigarettes by 2025. And this seemed to have an effect on the committee chair. And then the people who were opposing this are very powerful lobbyists, police unions, the Chamber of Commerce, and small grocers, small businessmen. They line up and testify to the disaster that will happen if filters are banned. It was very poorly designed, actually, I think, in the beginning. So it was voted out of the committee, and it may pass with only the ban on single-use electronic cigarettes, which requires a lot more definitional sort of activities to make sure we know what we're talking about. Single use, for instance, wouldn't apply to jewel pods, which have multiple uses, but yet are tossed into the environment more commonly than just about any other thing. So what's going on now is that this is going to be taken up by local committees, local communities. Santa Cruz City Council in Central California on the coast has gone ahead and started the process of developing a local legislation. So that can get where it goes. And this is a pattern of actual tobacco control progress. Starts locally in California and then spreads to the state level. New York is still under consideration with the Tobacco Product Waste Reduction Act. This is their second attempt. It kind of got sidetracked by COVID in the last couple of years. And the purpose of this is to ban single-use filters as well as single-use electronic cigarettes. It's been referred to their health committee in their lower house, or actually in their Senate, actually. And it's been getting good support from a lot of environmental groups, as well as some health advocates, especially Parents Against Vaping E-Cigarettes, PAVE. So it's going to be an interesting contrast to California to see how this progresses, but it's in the works at least. State and local single-use bans. Well, one can expect the same arguments by the tobacco industry that there's going to be massive contraband sales, diversion of law enforcement resources from, preventing murders to addressing the sales of single-use filters, and then the issue of hurting small businesses and loss of tax revenue. And then one thing I wanted to point out, when you have an increased interaction between communities that may be more at risk for tobacco use and tobacco kind of adverse health outcomes, lower socioeconomic minority communities, that interaction with police and law enforcement can lead to adverse outcomes. Eric Garner was a young man selling single cigarettes on the street and was arrested and strangled and killed. And the industry has used this as an example to say, look, you don't want to do this sort of small business enforcement process. So this is of concern. The other thing I think that's really important is that people don't know the filter is made of plastic, and we have lots of surveys to show this, even those done by the tobacco industry, and that many people still think that they are maybe reduced harm from smoking. So we want to make sure that the evidence is clear about this and that that knowledge gap is resolved. And I just want to point this out. Robert Proctor is a historian at Stanford University, and he wrote a book called The Golden Holocaust. If you ever have a chance to look at it, it's a fantastic historical review of what's going on. And his point about the filter is that it's there to lower the cost of manufacturing because the cellulose acetate is actually cheaper than tobacco. So there's less tobacco in a filtered cigarette, which may in fact have been some of the reason why maybe there was a little bit increased risk of some adverse health outcomes. There's more tobacco in an unfiltered cigarette than there is in a filtered cigarette. That may have something to do with it. That's being looked at actually right now by some researchers. And the main point was that it keeps tobacco bits from entering the mouths and to convince people into thinking that they're doing something to prevent health outcomes, adverse health outcomes. This has been a fraudulent marketing tool for decades. And now we can't, here in the United States, they can't even say light or low tar related to the effect of the filter on smoking. So some of the current mitigation efforts that I think are important, that are a little bit more acceptable right now, or at least active right now. Public relations campaign. California last week put forward a new campaign called undo.org, and it has a lot on the environment there. So you might want to take a look at this. It's very easy to find the link on this. There are social media campaigns. The Truth Initiative in Washington, D.C. has been doing this for last, at least 8 years with an approach to youth who are more sort of interested, I think, in the environmental part of tobacco control that this represents. And then butt cleanups. And even though many of these are actually sponsored by the tobacco industry, such as Keep America Beautiful, the Ocean Conservancy, and the International Coastal Cleanup, they do call attention to the issue. They give us some sort of quantification, at least a visual sort of representation of what the issue is. And so even though they don't really do any good, when you pick up perhaps 1 million during the International Coastal Cleanup every year, it pales in comparison to what is really still in the environment that we don't even know about. Banning outdoor smoking is helpful because it causes, denormalization of tobacco use. It'll help at a sort of regional, or rather, geographically specific area, perhaps, to reduce tobacco product waste, around restaurants, around streets, around beaches. But it really isn't going to stop the issue because some of those same cigarette smokers are going to be dumping their butts someplace else. Anti-litter laws, they're in place here in California. You can be fined up to $1,000 per event. I don't want to spend too much time on take back and recycling, but the problem with that is that it's not going to do any good. I think the extended producer responsibility concept interacts with something called product stewardship, which has a more sort of extended sort of responsibility beyond the smoker into the industry, into distributors as well. And it spreads the economic responsibility around. Now, there's been a focus on sort of tobacco product waste mitigation, that is the cleanup, and that's a direct cost. There's a lot of secondary costs that haven't been considered, and this is something we're working on right now on a project that the state health department is supporting. We also have possibilities for hazardous waste applications. I'll talk a little bit more about this, especially when it comes to e-cigarettes. And then we have something called the Clean Water Act here in California. A trash amendment was added onto it that says you can't put anything into the storm drains that's greater than 5 millimeters. The responsible party for this is the community, is the management of the storm drain system. So that has an effect, and by the year 2030, this is going to go into place, and communities have to figure out what to do. Hence, there is a community interest in banning the sale of filtered cigarettes as one of the source reduction possibilities. And then we've mentioned microplastics. And this, again, the state is taking this on in a big way and has measured the presence of cellulose acetate in stormwater runoff from cities in the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area, showing that it's there. Whether it has health impacts or not is still yet to be kind of researched. Well, anyway, one component of product stewardship that can happen is to change the product to reduce the hazard. And this is where banning the sale of filtered cigarettes comes in. So this is essentially an extended producer responsibility product stewardship approach as well. But as was pointed out, we just cannot have the industry involved. Philip Morris has this big program now called Our World Is Not an Ashtray. All of it is focused on the consumer, the communities, the voluntary groups to support them in picking up their trash. It has nothing to do with prevention. Keep America Beautiful, Keep Britain Tidy, and many of these other organizations are funded by the tobacco industry because it helps them with their corporate social responsibility interest. I want to mention the San Francisco litter fee. This was put into place in 2009. Of course, they got sued when it was assessed. It was actually established as a result of a litter audit and incorporating sales of tobacco products in the city. And the city, an econometric study was done that produced an estimate of direct costs, that is just cleanup costs to the city of 22 cents per pack, and a litter fee of 20 cents a pack was levied. They were sued, and interestingly, the city attorney at the time was our vice president, Kamala Harris, who succeeded in overcoming these lawsuits. So this was put into place back then, and it's increased since then because that's part of the fee structure. The city controller can increase the fee as a result of increased labor costs and inflation. It's now $1.05 a pack, which is a substantial tax increase over this time. And what it does is it allows for adding to the price of cigarettes without a taxation challenge. That's important. We're working on developing a more extensive set of economic estimation processes, an econometric model here in California to really look at all of the marginal costs of cleanup and disposal from total litter, and not just from public sources, but from voluntary and other kinds of sources, as pointed out. I mean, there's much more to it than what the public sources of cleanup costs are. But we're also going to be looking at these secondary costs, impacts of litter on businesses and tourism, quality of life, and ecological services. And this is something that, takes a lot more thinking and using other sort of environmental examples to come to some defensible estimates. So we'll be doing that over the next year or so. One of the things that happened with the San Francisco litter fee was that the industry, along with retailers and some other chambers of commerce, et cetera, passed a citizen initiative. This is the way a lot of law gets passed in the US, or rather in California, that says now in order to have a litter fee in communities, it requires 2/3 votes of constituents in order to establish that. So that scared off other cities from applying these litter fees because they know that they would have to have a whole electoral process to make it happen. In California, in San Francisco, as I mentioned, the fee is adjusted annually, and the annual report, in terms of whatever sort of outcomes they could expect, found that there was less grime and litter, et cetera, on the city sidewalks, and approximately twice as many more routes were free of excessive litter. So they've been doing some sort of eyeball kind of litter evaluations to see what the impact has been. We don't know what the impact has been on consumption. We do know that the tobacco industry continues to fund these cleanup campaigns, getting volunteers, kids, and everybody else out there doing their dirty work. And they are not, again, a stakeholder, as we've talked about. So policy should address the industry as the source of tobacco product waste, not as a stakeholder. We've got some environmental efforts now to at least address the environmental impact of new products. The Food and Drug Administration, our regulatory agency, has a responsibility to do these environmental impact assessments of these new products, and they haven't done a good job on it. Mostly they've been taking the reports from the industry itself. We want to make sure we question the environmental commitments of the industry all along the food chain, or along the product chain rather, and resist any partnership with them, as has been pointed out by some of our previous speakers. So we are going forward with the ban on the sale of filtered cigarettes at the local level, we hope, here in California. And it's important to realize that the arguments for banning filters are very similar to those that have been successful in banning flavors. It means that it makes it easier to smoke and less likely for people to quit, makes it more attractive to kids. But now you can add the environmental impact onto it, and we've got lots more evidence on that now. One of the ways to perhaps do this is to limit retailer density and thus reduce the supply and concentration around those retail outlets. I mentioned the Clean Water Act, which cities are now responsible to prevent anything greater than 5 milliliters in the storm drains. Litigation may follow if we get this economic estimation defensible, as I mentioned. Public nuisance is the sort of basis for litigation, but also the cost of cleanup now, I think, could be incorporated into that. Hazardous waste law applications may be important. And then, as I mentioned, California is really addressing plastic straight on as something that they need to do to protect the aquatic biome. I just want to mention, this is the Environmental Protection Agency administrator under Donald Trump, came out and said that e-cigarettes are hazardous waste, and that they are need to be managed as such. And the example that has been used is schools here in California, when they confiscate kids' e-cigarettes and clean the e-cigarette waste from their school grounds, they become hazardous waste generators because they've collected a kilogram or more of hazardous waste, and then they have to handle this: transport, training, storage, disposal, all of which generate expenses. So that's another angle to product stewardship that we're talking about. So I'll complete this here with a photo from my friends of the Surfers Against Sewage in the UK, and turn it over to Laurent to take us home.
Thank you, Tom, for this wonderful presentation. So we'll go straight to Q&A, to question and answers. And please feel free to address them to a panelist, and you can please use the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. So the first question was about those picture warnings about the environmental impact of cigarette butts in the cigarette package in Europe, within the EU. Was there any litigation to address that? And do you think, and to add to this also, do you think is that enough? Because, for example, I'm currently in Spain, and I still see cigarette butts all over or even all over the marine environment. So what are your thoughts on that? And was there any litigation?
Once that you have in the European Union, you have legislation, and for example, for this Article 7 on marking instruments, there are technical committees that then make guidelines, and the technical committees consist of experts of the EU member states, and there's also some observers, and one of our European networks was there. And they had prepared, together with the members, a whole explanation. But as we were given the feedback of our national of the European network, it was very, very difficult to give the input that we wanted to give. So it's very difficult, as in an observer status, of course, to discuss and to see in these technical committees what your concerns are. Personally, I think, of course, we have here the sub-directive. So the scope is litter. And for that, of course, it says you don't have to put it on the ground. But it doesn't involve the whole environmental impact of the cigarette butt. There's nothing said about toxics. And the other thing is that it says that it doesn't say like how much percentage of the filter is made of plastic. I think that's much stronger if you name the percentage, which is very high, of plastic in the cigarette butt, and it makes more awareness of the problem. I think a lot of people I asked a bit around really do not understand actually the picture. It's difficult to read, and I think the last one is, of course, it says that you shouldn't put it on the ground, but it doesn't say where you have to put it. So it goes into the rest, in the rest garbage pot or whatever. So that are a few difficulties with the picture, according to to what I think.
So one of the concerns that I have is do we engage enough? Because so you suggest that it was very difficult to engage and provide comments. Tom, you said that, for example, in the context of in California, there was a fair amount of engagement from the environmental protection community, the NGOs that work in environmental issues. But for example, we know about 90 countries, for example, have laws or try to address plastics, and they address things such as, for example, plastic bags or straws for drinking, and they've managed to ban some of those. But they haven't done as much action on cigarette butts, for example. And I'm noting some of those environments. One of the things, unfortunately, the tobacco control community shines by its absence. Is that a key problem? Is it the fact that we do not engage enough in those processes and we do not take advantage of those processes, like the SUP process, for example, or even the new recently adopted directive on human rights and
due diligence,
and human rights and environmental issues? So is the problem that maybe do we not use those platforms enough as a community?
Yeah, I don't think we've accomplished this union of environmental and health communities. But to me, it seems just so patently obvious. One, plastics are a health issue. I mean, we don't want them in our water systems and in our bodies, which are now being detected, microplastics. And secondly, the plastic filter has no health benefit. And if you think about it in terms of making it easier to smoke, making it less likely people to quit, and actually increasing the incidence of adenocarcinoma, which is a more aggressive type of carcinoma over the last 30 or 40 years when filters have been in place. It is a health issue. It's a health hazard. It's a health risk. But there's just been this embedded concept that the word filter means that it's actually good for you. And I don't think we've been able to overcome that, and that showed up in this recent legislation attempt here in California, where the health chair, a dentist, an environmentalist, a health professional, was not comfortable thinking that filters might still be doing somebody some good. So I don't think we haven't made this connection sufficiently. And I think I fault the health community more than the environmental community.
So what are some of the potential? Were you going to say something? Go ahead.
No, just that I think it's administrations, and I think it's everywhere the same. They work a lot in silos. So as it is a health and an environmental issue, working always on two different sides, it's very difficult to get them together and to discuss an issue, having an input on health and environment together. It's very difficult with administration. So I've been really working, for example, to explain about Article 5.3. And you would think, maybe when you have a subdirective, it's for that the Environment Administration should be aware of the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, but it's really something new for them. And of course, once that they are informed, they are aware, and they act, or some do not act, but it is, and I think it's really something that we could do, is that we inform the environment administrations, and that we enforce or tell our national governments to do that on our behalf. So not only at a national level, but also at a local level, because with the cleanup actions there, and we've seen examples, the tobacco industry is going to local authorities, and then not the health ones, but the ones dealing with small, medium enterprises and with economy, etc., and saying, oh, we're going to solve your butt problem, your cigarette butt problem. And that's great. And we're going to give you some pocket ashtrays. And of course, for a local authority, that's good news. I mean, it's be paid and the problem is solved. But they are not aware that there is an FCTC in Article 5.3 that and hold the issue with the cigarette butts, what Tom explained about the environmental impact, etc., etc. So there's a lot of lack of, there's information on one side, on the other side, but we have to get them together, and we can play a role.
So this is a major challenge, and we hear in a lot of countries where, unfortunately, instead of health ministries, often there's not much awareness about the FCTC and the obligations under Article 5.3. And in a country like the United States, often that even less. So given that they haven't even ratified the FCTC. So do you see there's, however, most countries in the world have ratified a number of environmental treaties or human rights treaties, as well as they're accountable to the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Development Agenda. Do you see an opportunity to link those things and to maybe use those platforms in order to make that link and demonstrate that cigarette butts, even compared to regular plastic, which is already toxic, and recent studies have found that we found in human bodies now traces of plastics, but cigarette butts are actually even more toxic given the whole process and associated with it. So what are your views of using those platforms, whether it's in France, in Belgium, in the EU, and even in the United States, which does report back to those human rights treaties and the SDGs, for example, in order to raise awareness about this issue?
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts?
I think it would be very good. I think they're all related, but we need to, and I think we have knowledge, but we need to group and exchange our knowledge and get help from environmental experts. I mean, I'm not very. I'm still quite a newcomer in the tobacco community environment, but I think there's knowledge and we have it, but we have little. I mean, when you talk about taxes, etc., on tobacco, many people have no. There's a lot of going on. I think we need more research. We need to bring our forces together and work together. With the knowledge that we have and build on our knowledge to be able to address these. And I think definitely what you say is that, and it was both in the presentations of Francois and of Tom, there are human rights aspects, of course, with when you talk about environment. I mean, the right to life, the right to development of children. I mean, so I think definitely that's a good way to do it and get help from experts from the environmental and the environmental health side who have knowledge on this to help us with that.
And with the circular economy platforms that you also mentioned earlier, it seems like there's some amazing opportunities. So I know, for example, in Spain, the Cámara de Diputados, basically they approved a law project that would put the responsibility and would force companies to pay, but also even in the context of littering, would allow local jurisdictions to fine up to 2,000 euros someone who would litter, for example, with a plastic or some other products like that, and that would include cigarette butts on a beach. So I was wondering, within the EU, obviously in France, so there were some issues with the implementation of the Alcoa involvement. What would be do you have a best practice example? Is there a country that in terms of the SUP or the circular economy platforms, one that has basically could serve as a best practice example? What is there a model country that has done it? And even in the context of what was done in California, for example, with the cigarette butt fee, are there other jurisdictions around the world that do that?
I don't know. I don't know if Francois or Tom can answer that question.
Has that been done in other places? Do you know, Tom, for example, or is that only San Francisco that has added that tag, that fee on the cigarette butts?
No, I think you were mentioning Switzerland was considering such a thing. Again, the fee in San Francisco is meant to address specific program applications, in terms of information, as well as cleanup and enforcement and administration. So it's supposed to be more specific than a general tax. I think what happens is, that there just may be an increase in the tax on tobacco products in most places without it being so specifically dedicated to controlling the environmental problem.
And what would be a way to accelerate things? For example, one of the panelists asked the possibility of litigation, for example. Is that something that could be done? Would that be could be under environmental law, for example, or other legal frameworks that could be used to address this issue, whether in EU or in other countries or in the United States? Would that be a possibility?
Well, there have been interests expressed by some environmental lawyers. This would be a very time-consuming task, long-term, very expensive. It would have to be done with people who already have deep pockets in order to take on the industry. This is what happened during the lawsuits against the industry that ended up with the multi-state agreement against the industry that recovered, almost $300 billion in costs for medical care. But that was, they had the attorneys general from all of the states, and also deep-pocketed liability lawyers who already had a war chest to be able to spend, and it worked. But it's difficult, but possible. And we've published the basis for this as public nuisance as the main issue, but the economic cost piece, I think, would then be more would add to the potential for litigation. And I'd like to see it. And, I think that there may be some opportunity in the future, but it's going to take a while, I think.
Mm.
Unfortunately, we're coming towards the end of the hour. So we'll still would like to give an opportunity for the three of you to give your last words. So Francois, if you could, place your concluding words and remarks. Francois, Tom, and Danielle will be the last one. Tom, Francois, you go first.
Yes, sure. What I wanted to say is that we maybe have a really huge pedagogic work to do with politics, and in particular with Parliament. In France, the Parliament ratified FCTC in, I think, 2004 or 2005, I don't remember. And for my PhD, I've met maybe 15 or 16 parliamentaries, deputies, and nobody knew FCTC, so nobody knew Article 5.3. So you can imagine that in a local level, FCTC does not exist.
Tom, indeed. You're muted, Tom. You're muted.
I know. I got it. Sorry. Slow on the draw. Yeah, I think for me, the most important thing is local action here in the States, and California in particular. And once that local action takes hold, it will spread. And this is what we've seen in the past. And I really do hope that that local action starts now to focus on banning the sale of filtered cigarettes. They're an additive to tobacco products that has no health benefit, and we need to reduce or address the knowledge gap regarding them, both in terms of plastics and as well as their effect on health.
Yeah, we need a first jurisdiction to do it, to ban those filters, which actually have no function, no useful function whatsoever, only negative ones. Danielle, last word.
Yeah, of course, we have still until the 5th of January 2023 for member states, European member states, to implement the extended producer responsibility. And although it's a limited extended producer responsibility, it's a good start. I think what I take away again is that we have to inform even also the local authorities about 5.3, about the tactics, the greenwashing tactics of the tobacco industry. And of course, the sub-directive will be evaluated and revised in a few years. And hopefully then we will be well prepared when we join forces and get our dossier as well to make some improvements for us in the sub-directive.
Thank you. I want to take this opportunity then to thank you all for joining us today. Stay tuned for other webinars. There will be one next week, I think on lesson, in a few weeks, I don't have the exact date yet, but on lessons learned from the menthol bans around the world, given, as you know, the FDA just proposed a ruling, and there's a comment period in the United States on the menthol ban proposed rule. So that you will hear about experiences from Brazil, the EU, and Canada. So it could be quite an interesting conversation. And also encourage you to use our tool for advocates associated with the Human Rights Hub that we have. Can be quite helpful just to address some of those challenges we face and to encourage a whole of government approach to tobacco control. Thank you very much, and stay tuned, and I hope to see you all soon. Bye-bye.